I stood under a dimly lit street lamp, my breath rising like smoke, my hands trembling as they held my phone. The screen was on, the emergency number was about to dial, but I hadn't pressed yet. Because the body in front of me was not just a corpse, it was the body of someone, something inside me telling me that I knew him. His face was turned towards the sky, his eyes were open but empty, as if they had not absorbed the moment of death. The blood mixed with the rain, creating a small river running between the concrete cracks. I shouldn't have been here, and he shouldn't have died. But the truth was clear before me. I am the only witness, or maybe the first suspect. I took a step back, then another, but a sudden sound made my heart jump in my chest. Steps. Someone was approaching. Quickly looking around, I saw my confused reflection in a puddle of water. I was completely wet. My eyes were wide as if someone had seen a ghost, and my hands were still trembling. But the scariest thing was that I wasn't alone. I saw a long shadow behind me. I turned around quickly, but the street was empty. The rain was hiding a lot, but it doesn't hide your sense of danger. I didn't think much. I realized that standing here was the worst thing I could do. If the police are on the way, they won't care if you're innocent or not, because the evidence will say something else. I knelt down, reached my hand inside the pocket of the corpse, trembling in the rain, took out his wallet. His name was unclear. It's like someone doesn't want anyone to know who this body is. What I didn't know, why was he killed? And who wanted him to? I quickly searched in his jacket until I found a small thing, a key, just a silver key, nothing special in it, but it was tightly in his pocket, as if its owner knew that it was important. Before I could think further, the sound of a car coming from afar rang out. Red and blue lights began to shine amid the fog and rain. The police. I jumped up, stood up, looked around, and then started running. I had no other choice. I didn't stop running until I found myself in a narrow alley. My breath was burning in my chest, and my heart was beating like a war drum. I hid behind a rusty garbage container, watching from afar. 2 police cars stopped at the body. Men in dark clothes got out quickly. Their voices were clear despite the sound of rain. It's him. Where is the suspect? He can't be far away. I shrank in place. I had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. This was not just an ordinary murder. Minutes later, when the place calmed down a little, I cautiously walked out of the alley. I was still shaking. The rain was getting lighter, but it left me overwhelmed and worried. I looked at the key in my hand. If that person died holding it, that means one thing. This was the cause of his death. But why I began to walk quickly, trying to collect my thoughts. I had to know what this key opens, and I'd better find out before the killer finds me first. Then I saw numbers engraved on the back of the key, as if they were the coordinates of some place. I had only one place to start from. I arrived at the building half an hour later. It was old, its windows were broken on some floors, and its facade was covered with random graffiti. It seemed like the right place for someone who didn't want to be visible. I crept inside, cautiously climbed the stairs until I reached the 4th floor. Apartment 407. I stopped in front of the door, took out the key, inserted it into the lock. Perfectly matched. But before I opened it, I noticed something that made the blood freeze in my veins. The door was not locked at all. I pushed him slowly, and the creaking sound filled the silent corridor. The inside was dark, but it wasn't empty. In the middle of the room there was a table, and on it a phone glowed with an open screen, as if someone was just using it. And there was one message on the screen: "I know you're here." Then, before I could move, the lights went out completely, and the sound of slow footsteps approached from behind me. My body froze. I didn't turn my head. I didn't even try to breathe loudly. I knew there was someone behind me. Then came his voice, low, calm, but carrying something terrifying. "You shouldn't have come." I felt sweat cooling on my skin despite the cold weather. "Who are you?" I muttered. Then I heard the voice say, "The real question is, who are you? And why were you the first to get to the body?" I tried to control my breath. I don't know anything. I was just passing by. I saw... He interrupted me with a short, soulless laugh. Don't lie. You are here because you are looking for answers, but believe me, I felt himself close to my ear. Some questions should not be asked. And then suddenly, I felt something sharp pressing on my neck. I didn't move. The knife was cold on my neck, as if death was standing right behind me, but I wasn't ready to die yet. Quickly, I hit the guy's elbow behind me, turned around, banged the phone on his head. It was not a strong blow, but it was enough to open an escape route. I ran towards the door, but before I reached it, I felt something pulling me from behind. It was him. I fell to the floor, the room spun around me, and I heard the voice of the man getting up slowly. He said in a sarcastic voice, "You are faster than I expected." I crawled back until my hand touched something on the floor. Pistol grip. I didn't think. I grabbed the gun and pointed it at him. "Stay where you are!" I screamed. But he did not stop. "Really? You don't look like someone capable of murder." Maybe he was right, but I had no choice. I pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot filled the apartment. The man fell. He was not dead, but I did not wait to see his condition. I ran out of the apartment towards the stairs, fleeing into the night, which was no safer than this place. But I knew one thing now. Whoever I found on the road wasn't the only victim, and this game is not over yet. I ran into the alleys, the rain hitting my face as if the city was trying to erase my traces. Every step I was taking was carrying me away from that nightmare, but I knew I wasn't completely running away. I was just a temporary fugitive. The street was almost empty, except for a few homeless people huddled under the bridges, and some suspicious eyes watching me from behind the worn window curtains. I was drenched in sweat and rain. My hands were still clenched on the gun, although I could barely breathe. I really shot a man. I didn't know if he was dead or not, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to live with this act. But I knew one thing. Someone wanted me dead. I walked into the first safe place that came to mind, a small hotel in an area where no one was asking for your identity. I quickly rented a room, paid in cash, and went upstairs. The room was cold, smelled of a mixture of dampness and stale smoke. I took off my wet coat, threw the gun on the bed. I stepped towards the mirror, looked at myself for the first time since last night. My eyes were wide, tired, as if I hadn't slept in years. Raindrops were still stuck in my hair, and my hands with which the bullet was fired were trembling. But the thing that made the blood cool in my veins was not my face. It was a reflection of something behind me. He kept moving. I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. My body was so tense that my mind began to play with me, but I could not ignore the feeling that I was not alone in this room. I sat on the bed, trying to collect my thoughts. I took out the key I found in the body pocket, meditated on it. And while I was drowning in thought, a small sense of security. The phone rang in the room, made me jump out of my place. It wasn't supposed to ring. I hadn't told anyone I was here. I looked at him shaking, then cautiously picked up the phone. "If you think you've run away, you haven't even started." The voice was low, calm, but it carried something that made my veins almost burst from the intensity of tension. "Who are you?" I muttered. He didn't answer, but I heard another sound through the speaker, a gasping sound, intermittent breathing, and then a crack, as if someone was pulling something metal. Then a shot rang out. I suddenly hung up, but I had heard enough. Someone just got killed, and that was a warning to me. I left the hotel immediately. I no longer feel safe there, nor anywhere else. I needed to figure out what this key unlocks, and quickly. But before I moved away, I noticed something. A black car was parked at the street corner, its engine was running, and its glass was completely shaded. I had seen such cars before, cars belonging to hitmen, or maybe to the government itself. I wear my glasses, pretended not to notice, and kept walking fast. But after steps, I heard the engine roar. The car started moving, following me. I ran as fast as I could. The traffic on the streets gave me some time, but I knew that they would not stop. Turning into a narrow alley, I heard the tires of the car screeching as it suddenly stopped. They could not enter this place, but this did not mean that they would stop. She continued to run until she reached an old parking lot, the floors of which are dark and deserted. I quickly climbed the stairs, reached the top floor, hid behind one of the concrete pillars. A few seconds passed like hours. Then I heard the sounds of feet. They had followed me. There was no time to think. I took out the gun that I had been holding all night, and my hands were still trembling. I saw a shadow moving between the parked cars. There were 3 of them, moving quietly, searching the place. "I know you're here." Someone's voice came from the darkness. "Make it easy, get out." I pulled the trigger of the gun. My heart almost exploded in my chest. I wasn't a murderer, I wasn't a criminal, but I knew that if I didn't do something now, I wouldn't live to see tomorrow. Another shadow came closer. Then I fired. The sound of the shot resounded through the place, and the screams echoed around. I heard the sound of a body hitting the ground, and then the other shots came towards me. I jumped behind a car, the glass shattered, and sparks of bullets filled the air. They were shooting to kill. There was no warning. There was no negotiation. I got out quickly, fired another shot, hitting the second one in the shoulder. He screamed as he fell, while the third one started running towards me. But he was not carrying a weapon. He was carrying a knife. He moved at a crazy speed, dodged the last shot, and then jumped on me. Together we fell to the floor. His hand grabbed the knife, and I'm trying to get him away from my neck. A crazy power was emanating from him, as if he was fighting for something bigger than just killing me. "You don't know what you got into," he shouted, pressing the knife closer to my face. "But it's not time for me to die yet." I gathered all my strength, pushed him away, and then grabbed the knife with my bare hand. The pain was hell, but it gave me a chance. She turned on him, snatched the knife from him, pressed it to his neck. "Who are you?" I screamed, but his gaze was cold. Then, before uttering a word, smile. "I'm already late," I said, puzzled by my "I'm late for what?" Then, we heard a huge explosion shaking the place. The ground shook and the place was filled with dust. The explosion was so close, I even felt its heat hitting my face. The man was still lying under me, but his eyes lost life. I didn't have to kill him, but I had no other choice. I got up with difficulty. My hand was bleeding from the wound caused by the knife. The sounds of sirens began to approach. People were screaming outside. I should have run, but to where I looked around quickly. The parking lot was on the verge of collapse, and the main doors were not an option. Then I noticed the emergency ladder in the back corner. Jumped over the corpses, climbed the ladder as fast as I could. When I got to the surface, I saw the real scene of the explosion. An entire building has been turned into a burning mass of fire. This building was the Federal Archival Center, the place that supposedly kept all the secrets not revealed, and only here I realized the truth. This wasn't just an accident, it was an attempt to hide something. I stood on the roof, breathing with difficulty, watching the flames devour the evidence that would probably have revealed to me why I am here, why they want me dead. I heard the sounds of police cars filling the streets, and then I felt a phone in my pocket vibrate. I didn't remember that I had a phone, but it was there. And when I looked at its screen, I found one message. "If you are still alive, come to the next address. We'll tell you the truth." And then a written address appeared, a place on the outskirts of the city, far from all this chaos. Who sent this message? How did they know I survived? But I didn't have the time of thinking. I had to choose, either run away forever or face the truth, whatever it was. I crept through the alleys until I got out far from the explosion site. I got into a taxi, ignoring the driver's suspicious glances, and asked him to take me to the address written in the letter. The road was long. The city began to disappear behind me, and a void took its place. Dark roads, tall trees, strange stillness. Everything made the place seem like it belonged to another world. I was nervous. My hand was still clenched on the gun inside my coat. I knew this might be a trap, but it was my only chance to find out the truth. When we arrived, the place looked like an abandoned house in the middle of the forest. No lights, no movement, no sounds, just silence. I got out of the car, walked towards the door, then raised my hand to knock. And inside, there was someone waiting for me. I entered slowly, my hand still on the gun in my pocket. The place was full of dust, but it was not completely deserted. On the table in the center, there was a stack of papers and an old photo, and the person who was sitting there, he looked just like me, the same face, same look. But this guy was at least 10 years older than me. His hair was full of white strands, and his eyes bore a heaviness that I had never seen in any human being before. He looked at me silently and then said in a calm voice, "You have finally come." I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was looking at a copy of me from the future, a copy with all the answers I was looking for. "Who are you?" I asked in a hesitant voice. He smiled a little and then pushed the picture towards me. I looked at it. It was a shock. It was a picture of me, but at a time when I didn't even exist yet. I sat down slowly, my hand trembling as holding the picture. "How?" I muttered. I couldn't even finish my question. The man opposite me sighed and then said, "This is not the first time you have been through this story, and it's not the first time you have tried to escape. But this time, perhaps it will be the last." I felt the room spinning around me. "What do you mean? Who are you?" He looked at me directly and then said, "I'm you, from the future." I couldn't believe what I heard. I shook my head, laughed bitterly. "It's impossible." I felt sweat pouring from my forehead. Then, am I stuck in a loop? The man smiled, a sad smile. "Not quite, but you're very close to the truth." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to absorb everything. If what he says is true, it means that I have been through this before, that I was trying to uncover the truth, but I failed every time. I looked at him, my eyes filled with doubts. And what am I supposed to do now? The man sighed, then said, "You have two options. The first is to run away again, live a fake life, never knowing the truth. And the second..." He paused for a moment, then looked at me deeply. "To face the truth, but beware, because the truth is not what you expect." I stared at the strange key in my hand that he gave me, and then looked at it again. I had to make a choice. I stood up slowly. I felt an indescribable weight on my shoulders. "Where is this door?" I asked, and my voice was steady despite the storm inside. The man smiled a small smile and then pointed to an old wooden door at the end of the room. "Behind this door, you will find all the answers." I approached slowly, my hand grasping the key firmly. My heart was beating madly. My mind was screaming endless warnings. But I only knew one thing. There was no turning back. Then I put the key in the lock, and I turned it. A slight crackling sound was made when I turned the key in the lock, followed by a slow creak, as if the door had not been opened for centuries. There was not an ordinary room, but a long, dark corridor stretching endlessly, dim lights dancing on its walls, as if manipulating my mind. I felt chills crawling on my skin, but I had made up my mind. There's no turning back now. I took one step, then another, until I was completely inside the corridor. Behind me, the door automatically closed with a sudden sound that made me jump up. There is no way back anymore. With every step I was taking, I began to hear distant voices, whispers, laughter, crying. It's as if the place holds memories not only of me, but of many people, all of whom have walked down this corridor before. Then I saw her. Images are forming in front of me, as if I'm watching a movie about my life, but it's different. In one of the shots, I saw myself as a small child, sitting on the stairs of an old house, crying while a woman in a long coat looks at me. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I felt a strange familiarity towards her. In another shot, I was in a dark room, shackled with iron chains, and someone was shouting my name. But I couldn't see his face. Everything was confused, as if I was watching someone else's life, but it was my life. I kept walking until I found another door in front of me, but it wasn't locked. I pushed it gently, and it opened easily, revealing a spacious room filled with files, photographs, and ancient manuscripts. In the middle of the room there was a wooden desk, behind which an elderly man was sitting, writing something on a yellow sheet. He did not raise his head when I entered, but said in a calm voice, "I knew you would come." I felt my heart racing. "Who are you?" I asked, although part of me was afraid to answer. The man slowly raised his head, and when I looked at his face, I froze in place. It was my face, but decades later. I took a step back. I felt as if the earth was spinning around me. Impossible. "Who are you?" The old man smiled a sad smile. "I'm you, 40 years later." I felt the air disappear from my lungs. This is nonsense. No way, how can there be copies of me that look exactly like me? He pointed to the papers in front of him and said, "Sit down, I'll explain everything to you." Slowly, cautiously, I sat down in the chair opposite him, while I felt that I was about to hear something that would change everything. I've been here before, many times. Every time you get to this moment, then you choose the wrong option. The option that takes you back to the beginning. I looked at him in amazement. "What choice? What are you talking about?" He sighed deeply and then said, "There is something inside your mind. Memories are not entirely yours, they are planted there. You are not just an ordinary person. You are part of an experiment that started decades ago, an experiment whose only purpose is..." He paused for a moment, then looked at me deeply, before uttering the words that changed everything. "The industry of the perfect killer." My fingers clenched over the edge of the table, while I felt dizzy that almost knocked me off the chair. "What? What do you mean?" The old man pointed to a file cabinet behind him. "Open it, and you will find all the answers." I got up slowly, walked towards the closet. When I opened one of the drawers, I saw files with my name Timel, but they belonged not only to me. There were dozens of other names, and they all had one note: the program, the lost shadow. I felt a terrible headache hitting my head, as if new memories were trying to make their way into my consciousness. I returned to the old man, looked at him with eyes full of anger and confusion. If this is true, who made me? And who was pulling me into this whirlpool over and over again? The man smiled a faint smile, and then said, "You already know the answer, don't you?" And here, an image flashed in my mind, the image of the woman with the coat. She was the key to everything, but before I could say anything, the light suddenly went out, and a siren sounded in the place. There were people coming to stop me. I looked at the old man, but he didn't move. "Go," he said in a steady voice. "Don't let them catch you this time." Without thinking, I grabbed one of the files and then ran towards the door. But I knew that I would not be able to escape so easily, because this time, they knew I knew part of the truth, and that's reason enough to kill me. I ran through the dark corridors, breathing with difficulty, while the sirens screamed behind me. I knew they were chasing me, but I didn't know how many or how close they were. In my hand, the file that I took from the office contained the answers I was waiting for. But there's no point in finding out the truth if I don't get out of here alive. I quickly turned around the corner, finding myself in front of a large metal door. I didn't have time to think. I pushed him hard, and he opened onto a staircase leading down. It was pitch dark, but I didn't hesitate. I jumped on the steps. I hear the echo of my footsteps echoing around me. Then a gunshot sounded. I felt a burning sting in my shoulder, and I fell to the ground. The injury was not fatal, but it was enough to slow me down. Looking back, I saw the shadow of a man standing at the top of the stairs, his gun pointed at me. "Stop running," he said in a cold voice. I knew that voice. It was strangely familiar. I got up with difficulty, pressed my hand to the wound in my shoulder. "Who are you?" I asked, while the blood was slowly bleeding. The man took a step forward, and finally I saw his face. And I froze in my place. It was me, like standing in front of a mirror. But not that old man I had met before, but a copy of me at the same age, with the same features, the same look. But he was different in a frightening way. The same body, but the goal is different. This can't be real, while he was smiling sarcastically. "It's quite real," he said, as he slowly descended the stairs. "And you know it." I took a step back, but I was trapped. There was no other way out. "Who are you?" I asked him again, although I already knew the answer. "I am you," he said simply. "But I'm not the version you remember. I'm the version that worked." I didn't understand what he meant. I succeeded in what? He moved closer until his face was only a few inches from mine, ending the loop. I felt dizzy, as if something inside my head began to collapse. The memories are starting to flow. I wasn't just an ordinary person, and I wasn't the only one. You are part of a long experiment designed to make the perfect killer. But the experiment was not entirely successful because every time I got closer to the truth, I found myself stuck in this episode. Run away, look for answers, find out the truth, then go back to the starting point again. But this guy, this is the version of me. "I'm the one who broke the cycle," he said in a calm voice, "and I'm here to finish it." He raised his gun, pointed it at me. "But there can't be two versions of us, can there?" I had no choice. I was injured, trapped, and in front of me was a copy of me ready to end my life. But I was not ready to die. I quickly looked around and then threw the file I was holding into the air. That was enough to distract him for a moment. And at that moment, I moved. I rushed at him with all my strength, grabbed his wrist, took the gun away from me. Another shot rang out, but this time it didn't hit me. We got entangled in a fierce battle, each of us trying to bring down the other. But I knew one thing. If I don't make it this time, there won't be another chance. I threw a powerful punch to his face, and then another. I felt his bones breaking under my grip, but he didn't stop. He was fighting madly, as if his life depended on it. And I knew why. Because it was. Finally, I managed to snatch the gun from his hand and then squeezed the trigger. His body froze for a moment, his eyes widened in shock. Then, slowly, he fell to the floor. I stood there, breathing with difficulty, looking at his body, to myself. I felt my head spinning. Was I the victor? Chuckles. Or did I become him? I looked at the file that had fallen to the floor. I picked it up slowly, then opened the first page. There was a title written on it, in a clear font. The Lost Shadow Program Experiment Number 77. And at the bottom, there was a signature I never expected. It was mine. Does this mean I'm responsible for this, or is it just an experiment? Questions kept wandering in my mind, looking for the truth of everything I didn't have time to think. I heard voices coming from above, heavy footsteps, the sounds of armed men. I didn't know who they were, but I knew one thing. I am no longer the person I was before. I looked at the body in front of me for the last time, then turned around and ran towards another door at the end of the corridor. This door was different from the first one. Because it was not the door of the past, it's the door to the future. I ran towards the door, my hands still bleeding from the fight, and the file containing the truth stuck to my fingers as if it were an extension of my body. When I pushed the door, I felt a strange force sweeping over me, as if I was crossing from one world to another. The corridor behind me was filled with the sounds of the men who had stormed the place, the sounds of their weapons being primed, and their shouts ordering me to stop. But I couldn't stop. I crossed the threshold, closed the door behind me firmly to find myself in a place I wasn't expecting. There was no clear exit, no windows, no other doors, only a wide courtyard surrounded by gray buildings which seemed to be copied and pasted along the horizon. The air was saturated with a strange smell, a mixture of old rain and rusty metal. I looked up at the sky, but it wasn't the sky I knew. There was no sun, no moon, just a faint light that seemed to come out of nowhere, flooding the city with a pale blue color. I was lonely, or so I thought. As I was catching my breath, I heard footsteps coming from behind me. I quickly turned around, picked up the pistol that I had taken from my other copy. But I was not ready for what I saw. It was the woman with the coat. She stopped meters away from me, her face is hidden under the shadows, but I knew her, or at least a part of me knew her. I knew you would get here eventually. Her voice was calm, but it carried a heavy weight of knowledge, as if she knew more about me than I knew about myself. I grabbed the gun hard. Who are you? And why were you in my memories? She smiled a light smile, but it was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a person who saw things that should not be seen. It's not just memories. As for me, you can consider me your guardian angel. Her words hit my mind like a thunderbolt. What do you mean? I asked in a broken voice. I took a step closer, and only then I saw her eyes. You're not the first, she said quietly, watching my reaction. And you won't be the last. I felt a chill sweep over me. How many are we? She looked at me for a long time and then said in a barely audible voice, more than you can imagine. I thought I was getting closer to the truth, but the deeper I delved, the more lost I found myself. I looked at the file in my hand and then at her. If you know all this, why didn't you stop me before? She did not immediately respond. Instead, she turned around and looked at the strange city around us. Because you weren't ready yet, she finally said. I took a step towards her. I asked her, saying, have they made me ready now? She turned to me again, her eyes full of something I didn't understand. Sadness, fear, or something else entirely. Then she said something I didn't expect. They are not the ones who made you ready. It was you who did it. There were a lot of questions for which I could not find answers, but something in me was telling me that I had finally reached the point where I couldn't go back. I looked at her and then at the city that stretches endlessly in front of me. What's the next step? She sighed slowly, then pointed to the long run. There is one last door, she said, but opening it will not be easy. I didn't need to hear more. I tightened my grip around the gun, took a deep breath, and then started walking into the unknown. Because this time, I was determined to break the cycle once and for all. The city stretched before me like a maze of gray shadows and buildings. Everything seemed featureless, lifeless, as if I was stuck in an unfinished painting by an artist who had lost patience before he finished it. The woman in the coat was walking silently beside me, her steps steady, as if she knew exactly where we were going. I would have liked to ask her, to press her for answers, but part of me was more afraid of the answer than ignorant of it. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore. Where is this last door? She looked at me with her cold eyes and then pointed to the horizon. He's right there, at the end. I looked in the direction she pointed, but I saw nothing but thick fog enveloping the city like a theatrical curtain that has not yet opened. And what's behind it? She was silent for a moment before saying in a calm voice, either freedom or annihilation. We didn't have much time. I could feel that there were eyes watching us, shadows moving between the buildings noiselessly, as if waiting for the right moment to pounce. There's someone watching us, isn't there? She nodded slowly. They are not just observers, they are the guardians of the ring. I felt a chill creeping up my spine. And what do they want? She stopped walking, looked straight at me. They want to keep you here. Before I could absorb her words, a strange sound resounded in the air, a sound resembling a distorted human cry, as if someone was shouting from a far place but could not get out of it. Then I saw him. Shadows came out from between the buildings. They were featureless objects. Their shapes were constantly changing, as if made of black smoke. They were coming towards us. "Run!" the woman shouted, and she started running in front of me. I didn't need more persuasion. I turned around and ran as fast as I could, but the shadows were faster. I felt one of them approaching me. I suddenly stopped and turned around, and then I fired. But the bullet passed through it as if it did not exist. The woman shouted from afar, "Ordinary weapons do not affect them." Before I could react, I felt a cold hand touching my neck, and unbearable pain rushed through my body as if I was burning from the inside. I fell to my knees. I felt my head spinning as if the darkness was trying to swallow me. And at the moment, the file was pulled out of me. That file containing the answers I was going to lose my life to get, burn it in the air. And at that moment, I felt my soul rising instead of smoke. Is this the end? I fell on my knees and surrendered. And then, suddenly, an explosion sounded, and shadows scattered in the air like vanishing smoke. Slowly raising my head, I saw the woman holding in her hand a strange-shaped dagger, emitting a glowing blue light. "Stand on your feet," she said in a firm voice, holding out her hand to me. I grabbed her hand and got up with difficulty, saying, "But everything burned out." She smiled and said, "It's just papers. The truth is waiting for you." Then I asked her about that strange weapon, a weapon from the other side, she said, returning the dagger to its sheath. The only thing capable of ending them. She looked at the dagger and then at the shadows that were reshaping themselves anew. "So, give me one." She threw me a dagger similar to hers. I picked it up and I felt an electric current running through my fingers as if the weapon recognized me. "How do I use it?" "Just let him guide you." I didn't understand what she meant, but there was no time for questions. The shadows attacked again, raising the dagger with an instinctive movement, and when its blade touched one of the objects, he uttered a sharp cry, and he melted into the air as if he did not exist. I felt a strange power flowing through my body, as if I had finally become a part of this world, or maybe vice versa. Maybe this world was beginning to become a part of me. I looked at the woman who was fighting next to me and asked her between blows, "Where did you get these weapons from?" She smiled a slight smile and then said, "You'll know when you get to the last door." After a battle that lasted minutes, that felt like hours, we managed to eliminate all the shadows. My body was covered with sweat, and the dagger was still pulsating with energy between my fingers. "Is it over?" I asked her. She replied, "Not yet." I looked ahead as the fog began to slowly clear, revealing a huge construction at the end of the road. It was an old building. Its walls were covered with cracks. Its door was made of black iron, and on it strange symbols that seemed to glow in the dark. "This is the door." I approached it cautiously, passing my hand over the symbols engraved on its surface. When I touched him, I felt a strange heat emanating from him, as if he were alive. What will I find behind it? The woman looked at me, her eyes full of warning. Either get out, or the truth that you may regret knowing. I took a deep breath, then put my hand on the handle. It was heavy, but when I pressed on it, the door began to open slowly, making a long, metallic, buzzing sound. But behind it, there was nothing but darkness. But I didn't hesitate. I looked at the woman one last time, and then stepped inside. And that was the moment when everything changed.